Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 1 o'clock seminar, Inside the Beltway, Issues Impacting the Pork Industry. Policy decisions made in Washington have real and lasting impacts on pork producers across the country. This panel will provide an inside look at key federal issues, market trends, and legislative developments shaping the industry today. Please welcome Holly Cook-Anderson, Economist, Dr. Ashley Johnson, Director of Food Policy, and Steph Couser, Assistant Vice President of State and National Relationships, and they're all with the National Pork Producers Council. Ladies, take it away. I was going to throw a question at them. I will do this. What is your favorite cut of pork and how do you like to prepare it? And with that, I'm leaving the stage.
Thanks, Dale. I'll go first. I'm Steph. My favorite cut of pork is the pork tenderloin, and I prefer it on the grill.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Ashley Johnson. I'm a swine veterinarian. My favorite cut, actually, it's my son's. It's bacon. No surprise here. He actually every single day steals my bacon. So I don't get a lot of it, so I try to get as much as I can when I have it.
Good afternoon. Holly Anderson, Economist with MPPC. My favorite cut would be a slow-cooked pork butt.
Very good. So today we're here to talk to you about issues in the Beltway. As you are well aware, I'm sure, there's no shortage of issues, but we're going to get started by introducing ourselves as panelists, and then we're going to jump in to talk about the economic state of the industry, Make America Healthy Again, and then Prop 12 and congressional activity related to the Farm Bill. So with that, Holly, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Great to be with you all in Minnesota here today. As I mentioned, I'm Holly Cook-Anderson, economist on staff. I do work out of our public policy office in Washington, D.C. A lot of my job being supporting our team in the public policy office on matters all across government, from what's going on the Hill as well as at USDA and across other government agencies, and then also supporting our team at our headquarters office in Des Moines and out in the field as well. So I grew up on a pig farm in Iowa and proud Iowa State graduate, and so been on the MPPC team here for about 5 years.
Ashley?
Yeah, Dr. Ashley Johnson. I am a swine veterinarian. I'm the Director of Food Policy, and know a few faces in here, but like to just provide a little bit more background because, of course, people coming from D.C. are like, oh, no, they're from D.C. And actually, sadly, I did grow up in the area of D.C. I'm a little bit of a unicorn where I tried my hardest to escape D.C. I chose, I thought, the furthest away of possibly going back to D.C., which is agriculture and being a swine vet. I did my undergrad at Clemson. That's where I really got into pigs. I was one of those kids that always wanted to be a veterinarian. Little did I know it was going to be into agriculture and took that back to vet school at Virginia Tech. And I have worked as a swine vet my entire career. I've worked on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest, and I tried to escape DC, but here we are. It's the vortex that brought me back in. And really, I love it because I'm able to bridge the gap. I grew up not knowing anything about agriculture, and that's exactly kind of the people I talk to day in and day out. They don't know what is happening in agriculture. They don't know what you guys do every single day to produce a wonderful, delicious, as we all were able to have for lunch, protein product. And so I'm able to bridge that gap and be able to tell your guys' story, answer the questions as an SME, a subject matter expert, and really about food policy. And what that means is really it's harvest and post-harvest issues. So one of my big things that I love so much is food safety. I love it so much that I decided to get another degree. I'm actually doing my master's right now in food safety with Michigan State University. But I also deal with human nutrition, so I'll be talking quite a bit about that, and public health issues. And so lots of big things that are happening right now in food policy that I will be excited to share with you guys.
Thank you. And my name's Steph Couser. I'm the Assistant Vice President for State and National Relations at the National Pork Producers Council. And what that means is I serve as our primary liaison with all of our state partners. So we're really lucky and fortunate to have a great relationship with the Minnesota Pork Producers Association, and you have a great team here in Minnesota. I work with all 42 of our state pork partners on everything related to grassroots, state capital issues, and like I said, bridging the gap too with our federal partners in Washington, D.C., and connecting the team on any specific issues that each of our individual states have. Previously, I worked in Washington, D.C. for both Senator Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley in their offices doing agriculture policy, and prior to that, spent some time with the Iowa pork producers. I did grow up on my family's pig farm in Iowa and am a fellow proud Iowa State Cyclone. So thank you for having us. We have two wonderful colleagues of mine. They are the subject matter experts, and so we'll really dive in. I want to start off with Holly. 2025 was a year that brought much needed economic relief for pork producers following historic losses in 2023 and 2024. But at the same time, there's plenty of volatility and no shortage of challenges, whether that was retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. pork, PRRS losses, and ongoing concerns with issues created by Proposition 12. As we enter 2026, much of that uncertainty remains. Can you walk us through some of the key supply and demand factors that are driving opportunities for pork producers this year?
Absolutely, Steph. And I am going to rely on a few slides to help us kind of walk through this discussion, but really just want to set the stage here. And as you mentioned, reflecting on 2025 and then also highlighting what are those important factors that we need to be paying attention to that are going to tell us what opportunities may exist here in 2026. So to get started here, if I can advance, just kind of a reflection on 2025 and comparing it to previous years to see kind of what did those opportunities look like. I'm going to rely here on information from Iowa State University. They put out a monthly estimate of profitability or returns on an estimated basis for farrow to finish producers in Iowa. This calculation doesn't assume any sort of risk management benefit, so really just the prices as they were at the time that this was calculated. So on the left there, we've just got the annual average, and this is, you can see 2025 average $21 per head. As an estimated return, and we're going to call it opportunity because we know very well that this doesn't represent every single operation or even any particular operation, and so those impacted by things like production losses due to PRRS that may have prevented a farm from being able to fully capitalize on what the market was maybe offering at the time. Just certainly want to acknowledge that. But we've got this historical baseline here, and that tells us that 2025 ranked 7th best in terms of profitability opportunity per the Iowa State model. And that's pretty well explained by what's on the right, showing that we had the 3rd highest nominal hog price in the history of livestock mandatory reporting at about $93 per 100 pounds. So a couple things. One, as we kind of talk through what 2026 is looking like, just keep in mind that we're comparing against a very strong base in 2025. But also you see that we rank 3rd in terms of hog price, but 7th in terms of margin opportunity. And that's explained by, of course, the fact that we have higher costs today than we have previously. We've gotten back to a place where our feed cost side of the equation is looking comparable to what we've seen in other years, but that non-feed side has not declined, and it likely will continue to increase because it's driven by things like labor, supplies, anything related to services, or of course the maintenance and continued improvement of our building facilities, as well as things like insurance and interest and things like that. So that portion of our cost portfolio is up over 40% compared to a couple years ago, and really no reason to think that it's going to come down. So we're in a higher cost environment, but we've been fortunate to see support on the price side of things, and in 2025 that was both supply and demand side support, and so that's going to continue to be important as we move into 2026. And so zooming out a little bit here, not just talking about 2025, but this is the historical look. This is every month of data that Iowa State monthly return data series offers us, just to show us, we're coming out of 2025, certainly a welcome turn in the trend here, but this comes after, as we all know, a really sustained period of significant losses. And so just to put again in perspective, I mentioned that not every producer maybe was able to participate fully in these opportunities, but also if we look at as an industry and our financial health, coming out of 2024, we saw things turn back positive again, but if we average out everything that's happened from January 2023 through the end of last year, we come out basically break even. We've got the red number there at a negative $4. That's if we don't include the manure credit. You could get a little bit above break even if you do include Iowa State's manure credit estimate, but it's basically flat. And adding on to that, if we were to just sum these all up, and so we've got a cumulative kind of running total of what these returns look like, we're still not back to where we were in 2022 before we saw that downturn take place. And so based on current futures and what feed costs are looking like, we could potentially get back to that place kind of as an industry or, based on this measurement by maybe late summer. But just certainly underscoring the fact that that's not to say that we've erased all the damage that was done and that we still need to be continuing this momentum to see our industry continue to rebuild equity and establish a healthier financial position. And so getting into the factors that are going to drive that, we've got, of course, on the price side of the equation, I've just got here the weekly negotiated hog prices on the left and then the weekly negotiated cutout on the right, both of which have seen some good momentum here to start the year. Particularly on the left there, you see that negotiated hog price jump up significantly. That is on a very, very small volume of hogs. We've seen that continue to kind of decline over the years. That's been especially true this year, but the past couple weeks have averaged, I think, second best in history for the negotiated price for this time in February. And then we've also seen a record start to the year for the cutout. The year-to-date average is only $2 higher than 2025, but it's the highest average for this period of the year ever, or at least, since this was mandatory information. And so this is, of course, supportive. I want to highlight that we're, again, comparing against strong values in 2025. Some of that was supported by supply shortfalls, driven by probably a couple of reasons. Certainly disease challenges can come into play there. But as we move into 2026 and we look at what production and slaughter has looked like so far this year, we're actually running a little bit higher year to date if we're just comparing the same first 6 weeks of the year this year versus the same 6 weeks last year. We're up about 0.6% in terms of hog slaughter. The last 3 or 4 weeks have been, basically dead even with 2025, but we're not, necessarily going to credit those higher prices with a production shortfall because that's been either the same or a little bit higher. And actually, since from December 1st through mid-January, we're up over 2%. And so it's, generally a positive thing if we can say, well, it's not supply, it must be a demand-driven thing. And I think that's going to be an important theme as we continue to move into 2026. So looking at that side there's a lot of different things we could talk about with demand. I'm going to try to talk through a few of them without showing you too many charts, but this is just our snapshot of wholesale pork prices as represented by the pork cutout, plotted against the total amount of pork that we've made available as an industry, both what was consumed domestically and what we exported. And so taking that annual average cutout versus the total pork for the year just gives us a very broad general snapshot of each year just to see how we've been performing. And then that conveniently kind of lines up with an approximate demand curve. So the takeaway here being 2025, by this metric, a strong year for pork demand, right up there with 21 and 22. And again, this is on the wholesale level. Things look a little bit different when you drill down into retail. But if that vertical line there is just showing us what, at this point in time, USDA is expecting we'll have for pork available in 2026. So it just kind of shows us where we would need that cutout value to be to demonstrate that we've not seen any decline in demand. You can see about a $100 cutout for this year would show us that we're sustaining that level. And so what are the factors that we look to see if maybe we could see an increase in demand? An important one that we don't normally have a lot of data to put behind, but it's worth mentioning, is tastes and preferences. There's great work being done to boost demand for pork domestically here. I know Dr. Johnson may talk about a few opportunities in the policy space, a shifting environment there that may be more favorable and have more opportunities for pork and meat as a whole. But we also look at things like consumer incomes, and there's been kind of some mixed signals there. You look at macro level data, some of it looks okay. Consumer sentiment's been pretty down in the dumps over the last year. It's down about 20% compared to where it was last year. There's good consumer work that's been done, funded by the checkoff, but done it with researchers at Kansas State that shows that does have an impact on consumer purchasing patterns when it comes to pork and beef. But at the same time, pork is continuing to be relatively more affordable than beef, which is sometimes considered a substitute protein. Again, there's been research done that shows that depending what market in the United States you're looking at and depending what cut you're looking at, that impact can vary significantly, anywhere from no impact to saying that certain pork cuts might be complements of beef, so higher beef prices mean they're buying less of that pork cut. But for some cuts, there is a positive impact here in terms of pork purchases increasing when beef prices increase. The impacts are very, very small, but beef prices have increased so significantly that maybe that's coming into effect more than it ever has previously. We've got about a 20% increase in the beef to pork price ratio compared to 12 months ago. And beef prices increasing, according to the USDA numbers, about $1.50 in just a year. So if that's ever going to be supportive of pork purchases, particularly for cuts like ribs, where those impacts are found to be larger, it would probably be now. And then, of course, we've got exports, which account for a really important portion of our total pork demand portfolio. Those were down a bit, 2.8% through November last year, but really showed some resilience given that we had, higher valued U.S. pork and some of those retaliatory tariff headwinds, particularly on the variety meat side. So demand is going to continue to be a really important piece of this discussion. But the total availability and the supply numbers are going to be important as well. And so this is kind of a busy chart, but this is our U.S. pork balance sheet. I just updated it 30 minutes ago because we got a new WASDE today at 11 a.m. And so just to break this down a little bit, it kind of just gives us a roadmap of what we need to be paying attention to. So we've got production there. USDA has got us up 2.5% for production this year, with a lot of the largest increases coming in the second half of the year. So that's at this point based on farrowing intention information, assumptions about pigs saved per litter, and assumptions about heavier weights. So we'll continue to monitor that. We are up about 1.5% just through the first 6 weeks of the year on a little bit heavier slaughter and a little bit heavier weights. They've also got us up 2.2% for exports, so see some recovery there in what was a decline in 2025. But it leaves us with 2.7% more pork for the domestic market and a pretty significant increase there of over a pound on the per capita basis. So all else equal, this would probably mean pork prices would be lower to support more quantity available. But if we are able to see some strength there in demand, that could certainly be a positive thing here. And with this, though, USDA is expecting that prices will be up. And so that means they're baking in some assumptions of strong demand as well. And I think you can see the futures market is likely building in some of those expectations too, offering really significant opportunities right now based on expectations of what the fundamental situation may be at this time later in the year. But if we look at this as a gross margin and look at what corn and soybean meal prices are doing, it's the highest gross margin opportunity forward-looking that we've had in 10, 15 plus years. So certainly a lot of opportunities, but as we're going to talk about today, there's a lot of challenges as well. And so really important to be mindful of those things. And I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Holly. As you mentioned on that previous slide, USDA currently forecasts a 2.5% increase in pork production this year. So can we break that down a little bit? How does this forecast match up with production outcomes so far and a smaller U.S. breeding herd and ongoing PRRS challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to speak a little bit to where this forecast comes from, it's generally really rooted in the latest Hogs and Pigs report, which showed us that we should, based on market hog inventories, expect maybe 0.5% more slaughter for the first half of the year. But it told us that December, February, and March, May farrowing intentions were up 2%. And so that's our second half of the year, in theory, market hog availability. So USDA is going to be factoring that in. They're also probably looking at the fact that we've had record pig saved per litter every quarter since 2022, and maybe not making in a significant jump in that number, but counting on the fact that we have a smaller breeding herd, but a much more productive one. But as you mentioned, we have the smallest breeding herd in over 10 years. And so when we run into challenges at the farm level with production, disease challenges, that's a lot fewer sows. And so that'll certainly be an important factor. USDA has to make these forecasts with the current situation, the current policy environment, and they're certainly not going to bake in an assumption that PRRS is going to be more of a challenge to our industry. But all of those are things that are important to pay attention to.
Great. Yeah, and as you continue to mention significant market opportunities, we also are looking at risk management and things through MPPC's engagement. Can you share a little bit more on your efforts there?
Absolutely, yeah. As part of my job, I didn't mention, I guess at the beginning, but I work really closely with MPPC's Competitive Markets Committee, which is it's a producer-driven group. We've got about 16 individuals, 3 of which are Minnesota producers. They may be in the room. We've also got some of our allied industry partners who are experts in the risk management side of the business. But this group is where we take policy issues that are related to our markets and our risk management opportunities. So we work closely on livestock mandatory reporting, have several meetings with USDA throughout the year, and appreciate a good relationship with the market news team. This is important because, as we're well aware, our industry relies on that information for not just to look at where we're headed, but for those pricing formulas and things like that. And so really trying to stay on top of working with USDA to make sure that information is meeting the needs of the industry and is representing as accurately as possible supply and demand conditions. And that includes a deep dive that we've done on the cutout over the last year or two. And so just really always working towards improvement and ensuring that we've got a system that we have a lot of trust in. And on the risk management front, also working on issues related to livestock risk protection and livestock gross margin insurance. As things have come up from RMA and brought to MPPC, and we can go to this committee to get that producer reaction and request more information when needed, give feedback on policies that they're considering implementing. And even just this year, we were able to ask RMA to issue further guidance on their policy around subsidy capture so that producers could have more certainty around how they're using those tools in light of new policy. And we were successful in getting them to publish something that could provide some sort of assurance there. So really appreciate this committee and the work that they're doing.
And with so much discussion about trade and tariffs in 2025, can you expand upon how U.S. pork exports performed last year and what the global outlook is for 2026?
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned a 2.8% decline. That's including pork and variety meats for the first, I guess, 11 out of 12 months in 2025. If we look at just muscle cuts, we were down a little over 1%. So a big chunk of that decline is coming from variety meats, which historically, or the last couple of years, have been $1 billion value opportunity for our industry. They're falling a little short this year, down about 12% in terms of volume, and a lot of that came in that April-May timeframe when we had 170% retaliatory tariff from China. So those 2 months of the year really impacted what our annual outlook is, but there was definitely reasons for positivity and really signs of resilience in pork exports. Continued to grow exports to Mexico as well as other markets in Central and South America. And so, as I mentioned, we also had higher priced U.S. pork last year. So certainly some good signs. And as we look into 2026, USDA's got us up 2.2% and continuing to forecast that the U.S. will expand its market share just given its competitiveness. But slight, that's in a policy neutral environment. And so I know we'll have a really good discussion from Maria Ziba on our team tomorrow about all of the important policy issues surrounding the trade environment right now.
Thanks, Holly. That is a great call out for a deep dive into trade and all of our international issues. We would strongly encourage you to come tomorrow to hear from Maria Ziba. She's our Vice President of Government Affairs and International Trade Policy, so no shortage of issues happening around the globe, and Maria is definitely the expert on all those issues. But with that, you talked a lot about how there's some policy influence potentially on strong U.S. Demand, and I want to turn to Ashley. The Make America Healthy Again movement is no longer just a campaign slogan. It's now a major driver of legislation that has a lot of momentum. And so while it champions whole foods, we also have some concern about the trend in ultra-processed foods and how that's being defined. Ashley, you've been involved in this for 5+ years. Can you help share with the group how we started being engaged in dietary guidelines from peas and lentils to pork?
Yeah, so for those that maybe don't know what the dietary guidelines for Americans are, you might sit there and say, well, everybody's going to eat what they want to eat. Well, the dietary guidelines for Americans, they're actually published every 5 years in conjunction with FDA, USDA. And with the HHS, so head of HHS right now is Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And what is very, very important to know is that the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, or the DGAs, actually inform all of our federal feeding programs. So as you can imagine, SNAP, WIC, our school meals, veteran meals, that's a lot of meals, that's a lot of food, that's a lot of money. And so we have to absolutely have our finger on the pulse in this policy discussion because it can either be a threat or it can be an opportunity. And a little over a year ago, it was a huge threat. The scientific committee to the DGAs, they were trying to make it so that they're going to decrease meat consumption and replace it with beans, peas, and lentils. Now, who here wanted our lunch to be beans, peas, and lentils today? Not me. Like I said, I need some more bacon in my house because my son keeps taking it. And we were heavily involved and vocal against that. And we actually had a huge, huge win at the beginning of this year. We finally actually had the 2025 to, like I said, 2030 for 5 years. The DGAs came out beginning of this year. Who remembers the food pyramid? Growing up with the food pyramid, right? Well, guess what? They flipped the pyramid is what they did. And what that means is they actually put protein, specifically meat, at the top. This is a huge opportunity and win for us. Like I said, we were going in the opposite direction. And I will tell you right now, internationally, everybody's going in the opposite direction. Everybody's decreasing meat consumption and pointing at meat as the problem and wanting us to all go to beans, peas, and lentils as our protein intake. We were part of the solution to bring meat back to the plate, and that is a huge, huge deal, especially when it comes for pork. And what we saw out of these DGAs is not only were they saying prioritize protein at every meal, which, by the way, school meals, they will have to now write their rules to look and mirror the DGAs. My son, when he goes to school, they don't have protein at every single meal. Now they're going to have to actually have a protein at every meal. And what they also did was double the recommendation for meat, for protein, and are absolutely saying we need meat, we need protein, we need good digestible protein. This is a big deal. This is something that is very exciting, that came out of the DGAs, that we absolutely were making sure that they were also using our same terminology, and I'll kind of go into why that's so important, but they kept saying nutrient-dense protein. Well, that's something that we kept telling them, hey, nutrient-dense protein, because protein is not all created equal. It's not, and it's also very much going to go into the conversation I talked to you guys about when it comes with ultra-processed foods, because nutrient-dense protein, as you can imagine with what we use the pig for, right? We make all sorts of products out of the pig, right? We use the whole hog. We use a lot to make processed pork products or processed meats, and those have been under attack. And we have to make sure to separate ourselves out in this conversation. That's where this terminology of nutrient dense is coming from, and why it's so critical that that's what the administration and what the DGAs are saying, nutrient dense protein, and that's us. We know that. And so this is very exciting because we were able to get a huge win here because they also called out, they did call out, has anybody heard of ultra processed, right? Let's see how many hands, right? I tell you right now, I cannot go on social media without something about nutrition or ultra processed foods or something like that. This has been the past year that it has just blown up with food policy. And so I think it's really exciting for us to see this conversation because we are front and center in it. And this is where we're gonna kind of head into is we're gonna be able to leverage this huge win of the dietary guidelines for Americans into some of the further things that we're working on.
Speaking of going on social media, I don't know if anyone watched the Super Bowl. Did you see the commercial with Mike Tyson?
Yes. And unfortunately, I don't know. I have to be in the room with him actually tomorrow. I was going to stay with you guys, hang out with you guys tonight, but have to fly back because they are having an implementation rally tomorrow. And all of a sudden I'm like, wait, Mike Tyson's going to be there? Like, all right, I got to figure out my outfit here. I got to figure this out. But it's I think, a really great opportunity because what they're saying is whole foods, real food. We know that we have real food. You guys produce a wonderful, delicious product. And so this is a great opportunity for us to highlight that in these conversations and to make sure we don't go into some slippery slopes that I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit about with this ultra-processed food conversation.
Exactly. To get into that slippery slope, can you just help set the stage for how pork can fall into this processed foods category and what is processing and what are the specific ingredients and additives that we're talking about. We're seeing a surge in state level bills, and there's just a risk for ham and bacon, which we know are great products that everybody should enjoy.
All right, when you hear ultra processed food, what does everybody think of first? I know what's immediately in my mind. I kind of think of like a bag of chips. I kind of think of like back in school, like the honey buns that you'd get. Those are like what come to mind. The problem that everybody's trying to define this because there's not an actual federal definition. There is what's called the NOVA classification, which came out of Brazil, and that's what everybody points to. What this classification system does is it puts foods into 4 different groups, right? Your first group is like your whole foods or whole cuts, which a lot of our product goes under. Your second is your culinary ingredients, your salt, your butter, things like that. Third is processed. Fourth is what they call ultra-processed. The problem with how people are trying to define things is they are just simply going off of processing, which, by the way, processing is not bad. It does not mean a nutrient-inferior product. And it's also, unfortunately, blurring the lines between food safety and nutrition, where things that we use to create safe food, a shelf-stable food, or allow for nutrient availability, so in other words, fortification of foods, are all of a sudden going to put a product that's very healthy, nutrient-dense, into this ultra-processed food conversation. So let's take an example of some of our products. Bacon, like I said, one of the things I wish I had more in my life. Hams, deli meats, right? We just had sandwiches with some deli cuts on there. Just because they are processed or have a food additive to make sure that it is shelf stable, so in other words, it doesn't spoil on us, and make sure that we don't have bacterial growth in our products, right? We want to have safe food. Just because you use those things, all of a sudden is going to put a product that is the same as a bag of chips. Now we know, eyeball test, we know that those are not the same thing, right? Nutrition-wise. A pork product that's processed is not the same nutritional profile as those things. And that's where we get into this conversation of nutrient dense, because what we're seeing is we have this slippery slope where our products, a big portion of our portfolio, could get put in a very negative connotation of ultra processed. And we are seeing that, and we've been seeing that all around the country, especially when it comes to state bills. The states are going in and wanting to define ultra process. They're wanting to get anything that has an additive out of food. And I think it's a problem because people do not understand the importance of food additives and food safety and why we use them. So it's a lot of education, it's a lot of things that we have to go through. But you can see this is just in 2025. And this affects so many school meals, it affects SNAP, it affects so many people's ability to get healthy food on the table. And this is where we had such a big win with the DGAs. We have to continue working on this issue with ultra-processed foods and food additives.
Great point, Ashley. And this is just another example of how MPPC is involved with all of our state partners and even the states where we don't have a pork presence. Because, for example, just this past April in California, they introduced a piece of legislation that was the first state to define ultra-processed foods. And it was specifically related to their school lunch program, which California has over 1 billion school meals per year. And where else have we seen California try to dictate policy like this? So can you explain maybe some of the involvement there?
We jumped on this very quickly, seeing obviously the huge potential downfall in California, because they even specifically labeled this bill like particularly harmful. And that is terrifying because all of a sudden our pork products are gonna be put in as particularly harmful. And the problem here too, once again, the bill writers, just not understanding food processing and why things are actually important. Something to take into consideration is like food additives. A lot of people think of that's stuff that we're putting in the food. Well, actually in the US, regulatory-wise, anything like with food contact is gonna be regulated, right? So think about packaging. Packaging is a food additive. Stuff that contacts our food, such as gases. And this is where California, we really fought them hard because they were saying gases, if anything that uses like, nitrogen or anything like that to displace oxygen, so in other words, like any type of packaging that can help make sure we have a longer shelf stability and make sure we don't have an environment where a bunch of microbes can grow, is all of a sudden deemed a negative food additive and it's going to harm us all. And I sat there and said, I think you guys are meaning to go after like the spray can of cheese, right? That's what you guys are going after? And not actually what we do is make sure we have safe food that can be delivered all across this country and worldwide. That is such a critical thing. And so those are the type of things we are really vocal and fighting this on. We actually just had a big win yesterday where we had a similar kind of bill in Indiana, where we worked very hard on killing that bill, and that bill actually got killed, which is great because, once again, there's these food additives that are being listed that are critical for, like I always say, food safety, shelf stability, nutrient availability. They're getting listed. They're things that we use in pork products, and if they get banned, all of a sudden our products can get banned.
Exactly. And so as we work to prevent, this patchwork again of state rules and regulations as it pertains now to food additives and the ultra-processed foods definition, can you walk us through what the next steps might be in terms of a federal definition and also the international marketplace?
Yeah, so this is the current heat map I just had drawn up for me last night. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of bills. I think there's like over 230 bills out there right now, statewide. It's kind of terrifying if you have to ask me, where you can have this huge patchwork of legislation that makes it almost near impossible to everybody abide by and have food. And so we have this state picture here, and then we also have then the federal picture, where on the federal side, both the FDA and USDA had a request for information out there on ultra-processed foods because they want to define it as well. So we have federal, we have state, and then I'm gonna also remind you what nobody ever likes to talk about, which is the international side, One thing that we know how big our portfolio is affected on the international side, as Holly pointed out, and we have to make sure that we're involved in that as well, because in the International Food Code, which is called the Codex Alimentarius, they were actually talking about this past session, this was back in December and November, do we need to make standards on ultra-processed foods internationally? And then the WHO, World Health Organization, guess what? They're coming out with their own definition this year. So there is international, there's federal, there's state, everybody's talking about this and trying to regulate it, and it is something that we have to make sure we do not fall into this negative category, because otherwise it's gonna make it very difficult to have all of our pork products being able to be sold and also just be available. I mean, it's so critically important to make sure we have a nutrient-dense protein available for everybody and for taste and for our bodies.
No shortage of work for you, Ashley.
Never.
What do you see next?
Next, so ultra-processed foods, like I said, this is gonna be a long-term fight. This is gonna be something we're leading the way, honestly, of making sure that this isn't detrimental. We're really trying to make sure on both the state, federal, and international that we do not fall in that category. But there's other things in food policy that's happening too. We just today also a request for information on a specific food additive, BHA. You know, there's a lot of things happening right now. There's going to be a new grass rule for anybody that works in the animal feed side of things. If you have any questions, please see me afterwards. But there's a lot going on there as well when it comes to different policies and regulations that are coming down the pipeline.
Thank you, Ashley. I think now we'll move on to the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah, switching gears a little bit into more like federal legislative issues, a couple important ones to talk about. The One Big Beautiful Bill, a lot of victories for U.S. pig farmers, but also some notable holes, or one big hole. Steph, maybe you can walk us through a little bit kind of what those wins were and what that means for producers.
Sure. Yeah, so the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was officially signed July 4th of 2025. And the One Big Beautiful Bill included a number of wins for the family farmer. I'll start off by talking about the tax provisions. Go to the next. So there was Section 179 and bonus depreciation. Those were both included here that allows producers the flexibility to plan cash flows for major asset acquisitions and 100% expensing of those capital investments. And another big tax win was the estate tax tripling of that exemption, and it protects really the next generation of pork producers as you're looking to transition that farm to the next generation from being forced to liquidate and put that burden potentially on the next generation. Another win was the qualified business income deduction that was made permanent. It allows producers to make organizational decisions for your businesses, not based solely on tax liability. And they also changed the way that business interest expense limitation is calculated in a way to avoid harming producers who rely on borrowing to make improvements or normalize cash flow in poor market conditions. So those were just some of the big tax wins. And we didn't work on this solely as the National Pork Producers Council. This is a great example of collaboration with our fellow partners across the ag industry, recognizing the importance for farmers writ large, whether it's corn, soy, beef, poultry, et cetera. Another big win was vital funding for our animal health priorities with foreign animal disease preparedness. We were able to secure necessary resources to continue to protect the nation's food supply through that prevention, which includes the National Animal Vaccine and Veterinary Countermeasures Bank. This includes the National Animal Health Lab Network, the NALN labs that are critically important across the United States, the National Animal Disease Preparedness and Response Program, and the National Vet Stockpile. And so this was a huge win for us to make sure that that's properly funded in light of all of the disease challenges and high-path avian influenza that we've seen wreak havoc here recently. Another major win was the funding for the market access program and foreign market development, just maintaining market access and cooperation between USDA and our global markets. And this is funding for that market access program, foreign market development, as well as $285 million that was new for the Supplemental Ag Trade Promotion Program. This is all critical as we look to build export markets in new areas for our U.S. products through marketing and promotion. Another one that I'd like to mention is the feral swine eradication program that we were able to maintain resources for that important program to protect the health of our herds, particularly in some of those southern states where we really see a lot of challenges. This was established originally in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it's been hugely successful through their feral swine eradication and control pilot program, as we recognize the threat that feral swine pose to all of agriculture ecosystems, including human and animal health, and just that overall concern about African swine fever coming into the United States. So a lot of wins in that one big beautiful bill, and a lot of these programs would typically fall under the Farm Bill. And so with that, it was frustrating, I know, to a lot of people, or there might be that question out there of why Prop 12 wasn't included. We did try to push for that, but it is a bit of a technicality. If you guys aren't familiar, the One Big Beautiful Bill went through what we call a budget reconciliation process in Congress. And a budget reconciliation process is a partisan tool that's restricted to budgetary items only. And there's a specific rule in the Senate called the Byrd Rule, and this was named after a former Senator, Robert Byrd, and it prevents any extraneous items from being attached to the reconciliation process or the bill. So the Senate parliamentarian has ultimate authority over determining whether a piece of legislation is relevant and budgetary impact, and if it's not, it has no chance, it gets thrown out. And so we attempted to be creative in a lot of different ways to try to see if we could include Prop 12 in this, recognizing that it was moving forward, but ultimately it was not considered budgetary, and so with that, it was left out.
And Prop 12 is one of a big piece, but there was other pieces that were not able to be included in budget reconciliation. So what are the next steps for that policy core of the Farm Bill? Where does that stand today?
Yes, I think it's about 15%, they say, of the Farm Bill that wasn't included in that budget reconciliation process. And so here we are today, 2026, still operating off of the 2018 Farm Bill. So I was in Washington, D.C. When the 2018 Farm Bill passed, was there trying to work on the 2023 Farm Bill, and we just keep extending it. And I am going to be as optimistic as possible because we absolutely need to see this Farm Bill get across the finish line. But there is a mountain of challenges that remain out there. And as I just mentioned, with only 15% of the Farm Bill remaining, that's a significant loss of leverage for all of these important programs that a lot of members care about. And so it is a skinny Farm Bill is what we're referring to it as, a Farm Bill 2.0. You might move on to the next slide, sorry. And we are grateful for Minnesota members. We have Congresswoman Angie Craig as the ranking member of the House Ag Committee, and we have Senator Amy Klobuchar as the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee. These two members hold the keys to the kingdom, arguably. I mean, they're incredibly important members of Congress who have been largely supportive of U.S. pork producers, helping us on TN visa issues, helping us on line speeds, helping lead the way on the foreign animal disease prevention and preparedness programs. Really strong members, and we really would like to see them help us solve this Prop 12 issue. And we recognize they are in the minority, and so ultimately it starts with the majority's efforts here. And so we know that the House Ag Committee will mark up the Farm Bill the week of February 23rd. House Ag Chairman G.T. Thompson has been a strong champion for the pork industry. He has a solution for Prop 12 that we anticipate will be included there. We're really hopeful. The last 2 years ago, when the House Ag Committee marked up the Farm Bill then, it did get bipartisan support with 4 Democrats who voted yes for it, and we hope to see that happen again as we move it through the House Ag Committee here the end of February. From there, we've been told that Speaker Mike Johnson intends to bring it to the floor before Easter. Now, that's a big hope and prayer, so please, if you're the praying type, throw up those extra prayers, reach out to your members of Congress, because there is no shortage of issues going on in Washington, D.C., and this Farm Bill needs to see floor time ultimately in order to get it over to the Senate. And so on the Senate side, we have Chairman John Bozeman from Arkansas, and then, like I said, Ranking Member Amy Klobuchar, and they have not started any sort of committee hearings on this, and we know time is of the essence. And truthfully, it is now or never. We know that Senator Amy Klobuchar is running for governor here. When she moves off the committee, next up is a vegan from Massachusetts. His name is Senator Cory Booker, and that is a big concern for us. And so we need to capitalize now. And so we see this as really the big opportunity for pork producers. We do not want to see a patchwork. We do not want to see animal rights move the goalposts down the road and just continue to make it difficult for us to do business, because we know that it isn't about animal welfare. It's not based in sound science, right? And so ultimately, that's where we're at. There are a few other policy issues, I should say, not necessarily in our priority bucket, but there's a few other ag industries who also need to see this done. We're not out there alone, but definitely appreciate the opportunity. If you guys are interested in getting engaged, we'd be happy to talk with you, and Lauren is doing an excellent job back there. So at this time, I think we'll open it up for any Q&A that you all might have for us.
We certainly didn't cover every issue.
Right? Don't be shy.
That's okay. So, first of all, go Iowa State. Second of all, Washington, thank you for all your support. Can you help, for those of you who have had discussions with the administration, whether or the offices, can you help bridge that gap between, we continue to hear this message around affordability, but then we continue to see policies, whether they're MAHA related, whether they're Prop 12, whatever they are, that are doing the exact opposite of being able to supply affordable food domestically. Can you bridge that? I mean, are we making any traction in that area, or how would you comment on that?
I'll make up. Yes, so for those that couldn't hear, question was about how are we engaging with this conversation around affordability, because a lot of times these policies end up creating barriers to our ability to, for freedom of operation. And that's what MPPC is here for, is to make sure we have freedom to operate. And that messaging around affordability is heard in a lot of conversations we do have with people. It kind of goes back to some of these things where, for example, in MAHA, they don't realize how food's actually made. And so they think, oh, this is great, right? The MAHA moms, which are the influencers that are really have pushed this entire movement through, their whole understanding is like, well, we just want safe food for our kids. It's like, yes, we do too. And I think it's just, once again, that gap of knowledge, of not understanding, and going to those in DC, the policymakers, those people that are setting the tone of these things. Those conversations are being had, and they are starting to understand, if you take away, for example, a food additive or make it more difficult for us to have a nutrient-dense protein product on the plate, how is that going to affect everybody's ability to afford food? It is a huge conversation happening in DC right now, because it is a scary one, right? We want to make sure that we have, of course, healthy food for everybody, safe food, people have to also be able to afford it. And so that is a big conversation. In the rollout for the DGAs, Secretary Rollins did say affordability. They are talking about it. This is a big concern. And so it is bridging the gap of that conversation and that education of, when you do these policies, what does that actually in turn do? It's a lot of conversations, right? Because it's a lot of people you have to get those messages through. but it is one that people are starting to listen and starting to understand that there are real consequences when you make policies that make it more difficult for you guys to produce pigs, right?
What else do we have out there? We must have really covered it all. Find that hard to believe. Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to all of you investors in the room. You know, the National Pork Producers Council is voluntarily funded through your strategic investment program dollars. We recognize how hard it is out there in the countryside and how hard you work, and we definitely want to say thank you for funding us and allowing us to fight on your behalf. There's never a shortage of issues, and that's our job and our privilege to work for the U.S. pork producers. So thank you, and if there's any further questions, we'll be happy to stick around if you want to catch us off stage.